what's up, babies? Vira boy, welcome to my channel. Getting started just a little bit late. I've been later before. Yeah, I was worried I was gonna be a lot later than I ended up being. The meeting I was in was it had all of the signs of it being a very chatty meeting, and I've seen those before. I've been stuck in them before, and it's always a stone in my shoe, right, dealing with that one, because like I get it, right? I get it. A lot of people really throw themselves into their work. A lot of people find their social groups and everything within work. So a lot of people, because they spend a significant amount of time there. I get it, right? Especially when we're talking about a job that has always had an office setting type of thing, right? Because my job until 2 years ago was an in-office job. I was in the office 40 hours a week, maybe a little more, right? That's what it was, and that's all of my coworkers at that time. Well, when I first started, that's obvious. Most of my coworkers have been the type to they lived their entire lives. There's a lot of older coworkers that I have, that are getting up there. They've got like 20, 25 years with the organization. I think one of them's up to almost 30 years with it. And they've spent those 30 years living the, 8 to 5 with a 1 hour lunch break in the office, right? That's just been their lives. And so for them, like, their entire mentality is built around the idea that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. is you are like singularly focused on the office and nothing else. So they've kind of got this mentality that, oh, if it's a light day, then we'll just go ahead and let this meeting go for a really long time. So that way I don't have to sit at my desk and be bored, right? But the fact is we're in a work from home setting now. And if you have days where your workload is light, which like happens a lot, because a lot of the nature of a lot of our jobs within my, department are reactionary, right? There's a problem somewhere. Oh, we have to respond to it and we have to handle the situation, right? That's just a lot of what our job is. So we need to be there, but we don't always necessarily have a big, huge stack of stuff in our inbox. And so if you've lived your entire life of just being used to like, yep, no matter how miserable it is, I have to sit in my cubicle, then suddenly a meeting becomes a very like they crave having those because it's an opportunity to have like a justified work reason or just like sitting around and talking and not having to sit at their desk in isolation, and so there's this mentality. And so you see that in a lot of the meetings, right, with this constant like, oh, I wish we could go back to the office, or I can't wait to go back to the office, even in the face of a world where, like, fortunately, our superiors are going to allow us to continue working from home if we so choose. And I definitely choose because, I don't have that conditioning. I haven't, I've been in the workforce for a certain amount of time. I spent a certain amount of time in my life working in an office, but never to the point that I became resigned to it as a, like, necessary component of things. So it's just, I don't know. I guess all I'm saying is, like, because of that, like, there are definitely meetings that just end up going on and on and on, because it's not just we've got things to discuss, let's get this discussion done. It also turns into, hey, we're going to socialize, we're going to talk about what our kids are up to and what our pets are doing, and we're going to go over everything, and how's your grandmother doing, and oh yeah, I heard you had to take a couple tree limbs down from so-and-so who was gossiping about you about this other thing, but I'm not going to bring that part of it up. And it's like, that's just, like, it becomes a social thing. And I'm just sitting here as someone who's just not social in an office setting. Like, I very much am of the mindset of, I'm there to do my job. If I am not actively doing my job, I do not want to be there. And it has nothing to do with whether I like or dislike. They're perfectly friendly people. I have a different social circle, right? Work is work. I show up, I get my job done, and I go home. The sooner I get my job done, the sooner I don't have to be all stressed out about my job. So that's my mentality. So whenever the meetings start taking on that tone, I sort of enter this state of mind where I'm like, well, Gonna be stuck here doing the smile and nod game for a while. And this meeting, there was danger. There was danger. There were some of the warning signs were there that it was going to turn into one of those meetings. But fortunately, the person running the meeting had other appointments as well that they needed to keep timely. So we kept to our time schedule. So I was not nearly as late as I was afraid I was going to be. So with that long story that no one cares about, we're back. We're back here. On the topic of meetings, I'll remind up front, and then I'll remind again at the end of this session. I'm here for a couple hours to do some writing, and then usually I would do my gaming stream afterwards. That is not going to happen. That is not going to happen today. I have another meeting, and that one, just knowing who's going to be in that meeting and what the generalized topic of that meeting is going to be. Another one that's going to be a big risk for lots of chit chat. So I don't know. Wish me luck on that one. But the take home of that one is there will not be an afternoon stream either. Or there will not be an afternoon stream today, unfortunately. The good news is tomorrow I will definitely be around to stream. We will get a good full day of streaming in, which I'm stoked about because tomorrow is Planet Zoo Day, and I've been so in love with that game, and like I'm getting so excited to be building a freaking zoo, and I don't. I hate that I wait as long as I do in between sessions for playing that one. So it's going to be a good time. It's going to be a good time. Lots of good times. And we're going to have some good times writing today. I got a few things. I got a few thoughts of stuff that I want to work on today. And so we are going to, let me see here. I need to pull out, I'm going to keep you guys on chatting just so that way you don't have to sit here and watch me, like, go through all my folders and accidentally open up my awkward one of like feet or whatever. Whatever happens with people, and there's like always a controversy because they're always so embarrassed that they get really mad about it. Cracks me up, man. Those are some classics right there. But I need to, let's see, I need to figure out where I've got, because I've got there we go. This is the one. This is the one. Let's see here. Let me try doing it this way. It's got to open up. I found the file that I'm looking for. I just need to get my computer to stop being a butt and let me open it. There we go. There we go. Okay. Let me just clean up a few things. Clean up a few tabs and stuff that we don't need open all over the place, All right. We are, oops, we're almost there. We're almost there. There we go. Okay, I think I've got us where I want us to be to start off. So what I wanted to work on today, let me get us over into our live scene here. Hello, we're back. There we are. Okay, it's gonna be weird. Wow, the chat box is like spazzing out over there. I don't know what its deal is. Whatever. Okay, so got it. All right, so let's see here. We've got I've pulled this up here because I want to pull what I pulled up is, and this isn't something that I created per se. I've done some modifications to it, but I wanted to revisit it. This is a system called the Common Crafting System that has been kind of floating around online for a long time. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it if you've got players who are interested in crafting and doing those types of things in your D&D games. It's been a really cool tool to have and to use, to love and to hold. It's been something that's really been helpful for me in terms of, I talk about mechanics, and one thing that we work a lot on during these sort of house rule type of streams that I like to run, where I really like to give players the ability to really customize their equipment and their gear, and therefore the way they approach the game. I think D&D 5e is really awesome because of how much flexibility it offers. I know some people don't like that, And I think that's totally valid, because I also see the value in a game like Pathfinder, where, you know, its affectionate nickname, Mathfinder, right? Like where everything has a very specific way to do it, and if it's not outlined in the rules, right, don't do it. And I think that's I think there's a really good argument for those games being awesome, because, you know, I'm in a Pathfinder group and I love it. I have so much fun with that. I love that everything just kind of comes down to, like, I love the intricacies of the complex math, because the more complex you make the math, the more you can fine tune things, right? So there's an argument for that, but then the flip side of it is when you're playing in a group that really values creativity and creating an individualized experience for the game, I think 5e works really well because of how it allows to, like, it encourages you to do it. Like, within the rule books, it encourages you to do it. And some people don't like that. I personally love it, especially as someone who's a world builder, a DM who likes to play fast and loose to try and make, with the rules, to try and make the game super fun and exactly the experience players are looking for, right? It's like, oh, you want to create a magical item that there's not actually rules for? Well, let's make some rules for it, right? And I think that's where this idea of, like, the common crafting system comes from. And I've used it and I've made some modifications of it. So, like, the reason this is coming up is because my players have been getting a bit more involved in trying to create some of their own cool, unique items. And so it's gotten me thinking, like, I need, even if we don't make any changes to it, I need to revisit it and make sure I'm clear on this crafting system and how it works and everything. So what I want to do first is, I want to just kind of look at how crafting works in the rules as written, so that way we can kind of just discuss and look through and understand where the modifications of the system come from and where those are beneficial, where we might want to dial it back a little bit and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I wanted to do today. And truthfully, we may finish going over the things that I want to go over. Like, if we don't need to make any big changes, then I don't know that we'll need to spend a full 2 hours on this, unless I, you know, babble and ramble as I do. Gosh, I wish I could do 2 categories so it can be like Dungeons and Dragons / just chatting, because let's be real, when I get going, you know, good luck stopping me sometimes. But at any rate, if I finish early, then we can go and work on some of our magical spells and stuff like that. As we've been doing a lot of. But for right now, I just want to focus on this. So, crafting an item, rules is written. I'm going to have us just kind of go through this and dissect this a little bit. It's not too long. I don't think it'll take too long for us to kind of go through this and analyze the full thing. So I'm just going to have us take the time to do it. But crafting an item, this is within the, like, this can be found as we're going up here. In Xanathar's guide is where they kind of discuss a lot of this stuff, and they kind of do these downtime activities. Oh shoot, yeah, there we go, there it is. Example downtime activities, crafting an item. There we go. So Xanathar's guide is where a lot of this kind of gets fleshed out, and so it does a pretty good job of at least putting a framework. And then we'll talk about the common crafting system. But to start off here, character has the time, money, and needed tools, can use downtime to craft armor, weapons, clothing, or other kinds of non-magical gear. Resources and resolution. In addition to the appropriate tools for the item to be crafted, character needs raw materials worth half of the item's selling cost. To determine how many work weeks it takes to create an item, divide its gold piece cost by 50. A character can complete multiple items in a work week if the item's combined cost is 50 gold points or gold pieces or lower. Items that cost more than 50 can be completed over longer periods of time, as long as the work in progress is stored in a safe location. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, the simplest thing, an item that costs that would normally in the shop cost 200 gold, right? In addition to the appropriate, character needs raw materials worth half of the item's selling cost. All right, so the item sells for 200, so you need 100 gold worth of raw materials. I mean, that's a good way to make sure that players are paying attention and collecting up raw materials. I do want to revisit that one, but we'll get to that. Determine how many work weeks it takes to create an item. Divide its gold piece cost by 50. So 200, it would take 4 weeks to craft that. Oh, sure, why not? You know, we don't. It's a system that's just kind of coming from scratch. There's no real perspective. You know, there's no real baseline that needs to be, you know, associated with it. Like we don't have a baseline. Is the better way to say it. We don't have a baseline. We're just kind of making it up from scratch. So, you know, 1 week per 50 gold worth of value of the item. It's like, okay, fair enough. That's at least a, you know, a number for us to go off of. Again, I want to revisit that, but let's keep going with how it has things as is. Multiple characters can combine their efforts, divide the time needed to create an item by the number of characters working on it. Use your judgment when determining how many characters can collaborate on an item. Particularly tiny item, like a ring, might allow only 1 or 2 workers, whereas a large complex item might allow 4 or more workers. Fair enough, that's just kind of a standard players can help thing. Okay, fair enough. I'm already seeing a lot of limits here. So okay, so I'm gonna change my mind. Let's talk about some of these things and where I'm concerned about how the crafting system is organized in here. First off, the value of the raw materials. I mean, I get that, but I think it lacks a certain level of nuance to just like take the selling cost and divide it by 1/2, right? Because a good bow, right, versus a crappy bow isn't just about, like, you can take a fine piece of wood, the same fine piece of wood, and you can make a really good bow or a really crappy bow out of it, right? Depending on the craftsmanship. So it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? I don't know. And we need to have something, certainly. We need to have something. But the way I do it, the way I have it set up is, rather than necessarily dictating the quality of materials, you know, to do that, rather than having the quality of the materials or the amount of materials dictate the final value of the product, right? I have the crafting efforts of the player. And that comes into play with the next part, which is the period of time it takes. So I'm going to pull up our common crafting system here. So crafting list here. And actually this is a lot of like the way I approach this. The way I approach this is based off of this. So the common crafting system here, it basically has the description of it, right? So like description of what we're talking about with alchemist supplies and stuff like that. The crafting item list, so what is being made, right? CP is like crafting points, the way it works. Like the rules here, a common crafting system. During long rest, character can spend up to 2 hours of their time crafting. To do so, the player chooses a set of crafting tools in their possession, picks an item from that tool's crafting list. To start a project, the character must have all necessary materials in their possession. Whenever they spend the time on the project when crafting, the player rolls a 1d20 to determine how much progress is done on that project. Characters proficient in those tools add their proficiency bonus. Otherwise, you have the roll. Rounded down minimum of 1. The number rolled is added to the project's total crafting progress, or CP. Whenever the number of CP required to complete the project is met, character receives their crafted item and... Let me expand this a bit so we can see everything here. There we go. And finally, expends the material used to make the characters... actually, you know what'll make it easier is if we... that way. Bring this one back up to like a normal height. There we go. Make it. Characters may only work on one project at a time and must complete or cancel the project to start another one. I like this approach a lot better. The concept of the time it taking, basically taking the amount of time that they invest in it, right? And so if it's a complex item and they invest a lot of time in it, then great. You know, they can do that. So to look at our crafting list here, so let's assume we're making like a bow or something like that. Where I'm looking for like a woodworker's tools, I think. Metalworkers, tailors, thieves, tinkers, wood carvers tools, right? Like a longbow, right? And so the CP is kind of predetermined what it would need to be, 50. And we'll talk about like so I don't use this exactly as it is, but I use this as my starting point comparatively. And I think this is a better way to do it because the concept of a longbow, right? Like if we're talking about just the amount of time it takes to make something, If they wanted to make just a standard longbow, then great, there's our starting point. If my player's like, I want to make a really good longbow that is really well crafted and maybe gets me, you know, an extra dice higher of damage or something like that, right? If they wanted to do that with a longbow or a crossbow or whatever, then it's like, great, we'll do that, but it's going to add to the points you need to get to it. So it's like they just end up taking a longer time to make it, which makes perfect sense, right? If you take your time to make a more finely crafted piece of equipment, then it'll end up being better. That makes perfect sense. So I like approaching it that way. Now in the common crafting system, come here. They also have this like, okay, these are the items that you need. So they need 5 wood. And that's a good way. The way they've got it built up here, I think is a really good way if your players want like an almost a video game style approach to things where it's like as they loot the body, right? It's like, oh, you find 2 pieces of metal, right, that they can then use for crafting and stuff like that. If your players kind of want something like that and they can just like slowly collect up just by chance the stuff that they need for it, then you know, use that basic system. And I would encourage to use a basic like that, because I have tried using more complex, like, oh, here's all the different types of woods you can find. You'll end up with players that are like, I would like to find ironwood, when they're nowhere near an ironwood forest. It's like, okay, well, do I change my world for it, or just like keep being the wet blanket that says no, you can't find that? So keeping it simple like that makes the most sense. Hey Gabby, how's it going? Good to see you here. The way I do it with my players though is I have them tell me things that they want to make. Well, I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. A little tired. It's been a long week with a lot of meetings, with a lot of people that have been frustrated with me because I have to enforce laws that they don't like. But you know, what can you do? All in all, I'm not complaining because the bills are paid. I'm doing my job, and now I'm sitting here writing. So hey, you know, I can't be too grouchy about the world. I can't be too upset. Things aren't so bad. But thank you for asking. So the way I approach the crafting is more, like I say, it's more the way this does it. But when it comes to the materials, I always have my players just tell me, what do you want to make? And my players might tell me, oh, my guy is an archer. He's really good at that. I'd like to make a specialized bow that he can use and can be customized to do this, that, or the other thing. And I'm like, great. So let's think about what we need for that, right? We need some sort of wood, some sort of quality wood, and some sort of this, that, or the other thing. And so then it's like, during their downtime, the first step is like, okay, so if you want to forage for the type of wood that you need, go ahead and do that and give me a roll. And if the roll is sufficient enough, depending on how good the roll is, it's like, okay, yeah, you find some really good quality wood from this type of tree, because the locality, it's going to be like this, you know, to give it a little flavor, and you do something like that. So I like to approach it like that, so it's more so players looking for exactly what they want, right? Or if they're like, oh, I want to do this thing that's going to take some metal, it's like, okay, depending on how much metal, you might need to wait until you get into a store to find those types of things. And usually players are okay with that. Or if I'm feeling generous, I can be like, oh, okay, well, you know, the next session they're going to be in this type of place. Maybe they just find a little storage bin that has a little bit of, you know, a handful of iron ingots or something like that in their form to find. You know, there's all kinds of different things that you can. There's a lot of different ways you can approach it there. But in general, this is the way I like to do it, where you think about the specific items for this, like the specific materials for the specific items they need, as opposed to our rules as written system, right? That says just like, oh yeah, they just need, you know, if it's a 200 gold bow that they want to make, they need 100 gold worth of materials. Like, what does that mean, right? Like, you can find, if you go out and find a good piece of wood that you chop down on your own, right? Like, so it's like, how do you work this? And to me, that just feels too vague the way it is. So now moving on to this next part here, multiple characters can combine their efforts, divide the time needed to create an item by the number of characters working on it. So this one's a hard one for me, again. And I think the hard one for this one for me is when you think about, okay, so if it takes, suppose we use this system as it is, and it takes like 2 work weeks to get the project done, right? To make the project. And, you know, players are just working on it. It's like, how do we know, do they need to Like, is it just assumed that they're always spending their downtime doing it? Because if so, that gets kind of boring to just say like, okay, it's assumed that you're doing that. You don't, you're no longer, you can't do anything else during your downtime. That's the only thing that you're doing. And so it's like, I guess, right? And so it's like, if you're only assuming downtime is just if they're taking an extended stay in town, that's easy enough, right? But then what does it mean for if they've got some downtime at night around the campfire? It gets a little confusing and muddled. And especially when you start talking about this, well, what if one night one character wants to help with that stuff, but then the next night they've got their own stuff that they want to do? Does that cut in half how long it takes? Or then do we have to start like playing around with fractions? And it gets frustrating to handle. And so I think that's one of the places where our common crafting system, and like I say, I don't remember where I found this. I don't remember who the original creator of this was. I encourage you to Google common crafting system D&D 5e or something like that. This is a very good system. I can't really claim it. I do my own takes on it, which is what I'm kind of talking about here, is my takes on this system, which I think is a much better baseline. But this is just as a baseline, a really good system. A really good system. I think it's more complex, but I think it makes a lot more sense the way it's set up. But if we look at our rules here, so when we're talking about just making our crafting process based on you roll, and that roll earns you the number of points, this, I think, lends itself really well to someone helping. Because you can either approach it in two ways, depending on how much you think that assistance should be worth, right? You can either be like, okay, well, both of you are working on this, so both of you make your rolls, and then you add it, and that's like the progress that gets made. So you could, instead of just having the 20 plus proficiency or whatever, you can end up having a potentially 40 plus proficiencies, assistance or progress made on that thing. And so if you're working on something that needs, 50 of these crafting points to make, suddenly you're turning this thing from a, multi-day progress, or multi-day project to one that could possibly be knocked out in a night. And that makes, to me, that makes a lot more sense, because it also subdivides and it makes it really easy. If you're working on like a 200 crafting point project, right, that's going to take you multiple days and weeks to finish, and then every once in a while someone wants to help you, someone will help you and chip away at that, but you don't have to worry about fussing with, okay, was that enough help to actually take off a week if they only did it for one night rather than like 3 nights, or what if they did do 3 nights? Like, how does that, right? It just gets really confusing the way it is in the rules is written. And so I like this approach much better. So some of these things I'll have to try and remember. I'm pretty sure for like all the stuff that I did, this is really the only thing that I added is the enchanting, because I have my own system for the enchanting here, and we'll talk about how I've come up with that. And because, like I say, I may even modify it as I'm looking at it today, because it's been a long time since I've looked at this. So I don't know if my desires or like in practice it still makes sense to do it the way that I've got it written out. So at any rate, that's kind of where we're at so far, kind of going through how it is. And so as you can see already, I do have a little bit of beef, so to speak, with the system as it is. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say that I think this system is not workable. I just think that this system, the way it is very simplified, and is really the type of system that really presents itself as a, okay, fine, we'll use something, like it's something that a DM whose attitude is, I really don't want to do this, but my players do, so here's a system, right? It's kind of what it feels to me. It feels like an afterthought. It feels like the type of system that sort of just gets tossed in there, to appease the players that really want to make custom things, as opposed to being a system that encourages players to make their own custom things. And I personally take an approach of wanting to encourage my players. Now, again, this harkens back to what I was saying way at the beginning today. Way at the beginning, all like 25 minutes ago. All right, no, like, it harkens back to what I was saying, where a lot of where this is coming from and whether this appeals to you and you like this or not will kind of come down to your basic philosophy of, do you want to approach D&D or any tabletop from the rules are the rules, we're playing the game, we're following the rules of the game perspective, or do you want to take it from we're telling a story and we'll use the rules insofar as they serve us telling that story, and we will change the rules if they no longer serve that goal of telling a story. right? And so it depends on your approach. And so this system, I think, will work really well for a group that really wants to try and maintain playing rules as written, for the sake of like I don't like using the word, but like I could see someone making an argument for a more pure D&D experience as far as just like rules and stuff go. I think this system ends up working really well because this system just sets out guidelines, and basically the system says when your group is taking a week off of adventuring, that's your downtime. You can do this. Here are some basic rules. If you choose to spend your whole downtime doing this, then great, right? And so that's the I feel like that's where this system comes into play. But for me and the way I run games, and for anyone else who runs or plays games like I do, where the idea is much more we're collectively telling a story together, we're using the rules as a way to organize the story and make sure each person participating has an equal chance of having an impact on that story, but we're going to change the rules as need be to make sure that it facilitates the telling of the story that we want to tell, then I think the system just falls short. I think it just falls short. I think it's overly simplified, and I think it I think it has holes that are pretty obvious and pretty apparent to the player, the crafter, the DM, whatever, that is inclined to think about it more, right? If you just, break down the the items that you need down to the half the value of the item, really what that is saying is, okay, if you want to craft this item, you wait until you're spending a week in town. You need this much money to go out and buy your supplies, so you do that, and then you spend 4 of the days of your 1 week off crafting and you make it. And that's what the system is meant to be. The system is meant to be just like a sentence or two that gets you the item that you wanted to craft and gives you the satisfaction of like, I made this instead of I bought this, and call it good. But for me, at that point in time, I guess one of the things that rankles me a bit about the system and the fact that it kind of falls into that way of being run is, then why bother crafting, right? If it's going to just be when you're in town, you spend this much gold and now you have item, that's just buying it, right? You're just buying it with more words is all that's happening. And I think that's why this system just doesn't satisfy me. If a player's going to take the time to craft it, make it a thing, right? Let them go through the trouble of thinking about, well, I'm making a special bow, but I want it to be made in this, that, or the other way. I want it to have this custom feature. I want it to be made out of this thing. I want it to look like this, that, or this, right? If they're going to take the time to create that in their brain, if they're going to take the time to come up with that and they want to do it, the least I can do as a DM is give them a system that makes that feel as important as they have created it in their mind, right? Because to them, when they're creating that item, the reason they're doing that is because to them, it's important that their character has that item. It's important that their character meets a certain image that they have built in their mind. They are taking the time to imagine what their player wants to do. The least I can do is help them have a game, a story that we're telling that reflects the importance that they have already put on this item, because they've already created the item in their imagination and they've already put that importance there. And so now what we're trying to do is we're trying to collectively portray that importance to everyone else. And if it gets devolved to, oh, your character wants to make a bow, okay, spend $50 and we'll say that you made a bow this week. It's like, well, why didn't you just go out and buy one? Why didn't you just go out and buy one at that point? So that's my take, and I guess I'm getting a little more intense about it than I had intended to, because again, I don't want it to sound like I'm saying this is a bad system. It's just this system is made for a very specific approach to playing D&D, and there's nothing wrong with that approach to playing D&D. It's just not my approach. So that's why I end up using this common crafting system, because I think this common crafting system facilitates putting that that personal touch, that love and care into the items that, a player who's, again, taking the time to imagine an item will obviously has already put in that item. So anyway, thanks for coming to my TED Talk, I guess. We'll move on. We'll move on a little bit here. So It says here, a character needs to be proficient with the tools needed to craft an item and have access to the appropriate equipment. Everyone who collaborates needs to have the appropriate tool proficiency. You need to make any judgment calls regarding whether a character has correct equipment. Following table provides some examples. This I actually kind of like. I'm a bit more lenient with it because I really don't want to limit my players. Again, if they're taking the time to come up with and become invested in their character, I want to make sure that I am not stopping them from doing it, right? So there are a couple things that I changed about this, that the crafting system kind of also discusses and has a few changes in it. But the basic thing here is, first off, I don't require that a player be proficient to use the tools. I'm not particularly proficient at woodworking. I like to do it as a hobby, but I would not call myself a proficient woodworker. That said, I know how to use a saw and a screwdriver and a hammer and a drill to, generally speaking, put pieces of wood together. Now, am I going to make, artisanal, Amish-built cabinets for a kitchen? No, I don't have the skills for that. I am not proficient enough at doing that. But if someone said, hey, I need you to make a cabinet, I have enough skills to say, okay, I'll need this tool, this tool, and this tool. And when I have them say, I'll make you a cabinet, it's going to look pretty mediocre. It's not going to look great, but it will function, right? So I don't require that players be proficient. It basically just means that because of the way, and again, I do use the system, the common crafting right here, where it's like, where's the part of it? If the character is proficient in these tools, add their proficiency bonus. I like doing that one. I like it. I like doing it that way, and that's how I run it. Anyone can try to use those items. If you're proficient in using that, then you can use your proficiency. So it's like if you're proficient in using your woodcarver's tools as you're making a bow or whatever, then great, you get an additional +3, +4, +5, whatever level you are. You get that additional bonus. So it's like you're making a certain amount of progress with those types of things, right? So I prefer doing it that way. I don't think someone needs to be proficient to try, right? It just means it's going to be harder. It's going to take them more tries to get the final product they're looking for. And so I think that makes a lot more sense. Proficient with the tools to craft an item and have access to the appropriate equipment. Now, that one I do agree with. If you're going to try woodworking, you need to, at least within the party, someone needs to have crafting systems. And I always just do it, or crafting tools. And I always just do it within the party, not the individual, because, as long as someone in the party is willing to be like, yeah, you can borrow my herbalism kit. Great, right? Who cares whose it is? But like these aren't cursed items that are bound to each individual, right? These are items that like they're tools. They're tools. Anyone can pick up the tools and use them. So it makes no sense to say, oh no, you have to have your own set. You can't borrow someone else's set. It's like, this is ridiculous. But again, in this system, it does kind of qualify that. Have access to the appropriate equipment. Everyone who collaborates needs to have the appropriate tool proficiency. Again, that one even less so. That one even less so for the proficiency. When I was 11 years old, do you think I had any proficiency at all whatsoever in painting or sawing or like construction or electrician's work or anything like that? Of course I had no proficiency. And because of that, my dad did not let me use the power tools. But I still helped him, right? Like it sounds silly and minimal, but as a kid, so okay, here's another example, right? Okay, so last summer, I helped my aunt build a deck, or rather repair her deck. Her deck was just the wood was just too damaged, too worm eaten, too damaged by water. It was a very old deck. It was like 20 years old. It needed flat out, like the boards just flat out needed to be repaired, right? The frame itself was still good, but the top boards really just needed to be replaced and repaired. So I offered to help doing that, along with some of my cousins, and it was hard for her to do that, especially since her husband, my uncle, passed away a few years ago, right? So we offered to help, and we went out and helped. Now, my cousin, who was playing a big role in helping us with all of this, has very young children. We're talking like less than 10 years old. Of course, we did not let them handle the saws or the power tools or anything like that. That said, if you think it wasn't helpful to have them little fingers reaching, like nimbly reaching into the big old bucket of like screws and nails that we had and handing one to me, so that way I didn't have to keep like bending up and grabbing another fistful and figuring out how to hold those. Like I could have both hands free. If you think that didn't help me make sure that those screws went in straight and fast every time, like that shaved significant amounts of time off. Point of the story is, anyone who's helping you does not need to have proficiency in those tools to be helpful, right? Like it does not, you do not need to be proficient in anything to be able to, to help out when someone says, hey, can you hold this piece of drywall in place while I hammer it in? Like, all you need to do is be proficient at essentially standing and holding your arms like this. Anyone can do that. This is ridiculous. You don't need that. You don't need that for crafting. Need to make any judgment calls regarding whether a character has the correct equipment. That's again where I say, as long as someone in the party has the proper tools, it's fine, right? Even if there's only one set of woodworkers tools, there's still ways that other people can help out for a single woodworking project. Again, holding things in place, right? Helping mark, helping hold a ruler, helping to mark things. Like, there are ways that people can help in a project, even if you only have one hammer, right? Even if you only have one saw, one whittling knife, whatever. So for those types of things, like, yeah, no, I'm a lot more lenient on this because I think it makes more sense that way. As far as these things, proficiencies, this, I mean, yes, I generally speaking, this stuff is pretty intuitive as it goes. I do follow this. Like, you have to have the appropriate tools accessible to you, right? And there are some situations where I'll allow like a loose fit, right? So it's like if someone doesn't have jeweler's tools but they have thieves tools, there's a certain amount of stuff that you can get done with still doing that. Like, you could still use the nimbleness of thieves tools probably to help, interweave thin, small pieces of metal and stuff like that. The small picks and stuff like that. It's not exactly the same, but hey, you could probably still make progress. I might like offer up a penalty and be like, yeah, but you can't use the proficiency because it's the wrong set of tools. But that's all just a judgment call. That's all just a judgment call there. If all the above requirements are met, the result of the process is an item of the desired sort. A character can sell an item crafted in this way at its listed price. This sentence right here, I think, offers up a really good example of where this very broad, very general system comes into play. If a player is crafting items not to use for themselves, but to sell for a profit, this quick, rough and gritty system makes a lot more sense. And if that's what my players wanted to do, if they're like, oh yeah, no, I just want to craft some stuff to sell, then I'll be like, yes, we are using this system to just quick and dirty do that. I don't want you to have to role play, 40 sessions worth of crafting to make a single bow that you then sell for 1,000 gold when you're finding thousands of gold as you're going out and adventuring. That is a situation where, okay, most definitely we are going to go ahead and utilize this system here 100%. So there are still situations, and again, this is why I say this is not a bad system. It's just a different system than what I like to run for my players, right? So this sentence right here qualifies a lot of that stuff, because I would not expect a player to go through this much detail just to make, a bunch of shoddy knickknacks that they're going to sell for 5 gold a piece, at a local market that they can contract through. Obviously that changes the system. So crafting magic items. This is something where I clearly, because of the project that I'm constantly working on with these streams, I clearly have made a little bit of changes to this. So we're going to go ahead and go over this and talk about how I've modified this and how I've kind of come up with my system. And like I say, I might even modify it here a little bit today because I have not revisited these rules in quite some time. I've been using them, but I haven't really looked at them and analyzed them. So, crafting magic items. Creating a magic item requires more than just time, effort, and materials. It is a long-term process that involves one or more adventures to track down the rare materials and the lore needed to create the item. I agree with that 100%. That's where the sort of the rune system of sorts that I've homebrewed and used for my players, and that's really what enchanting is it's really very similar and very much inspired by the rune system that you can find like in Pathfinder, where it's like there are runes that you can then add to an item that will then change the effects, right? Like you can make an item silvered, you can make an item, you know, be able to attack ghosts and stuff like that. And that I think is really awesome. I just take it to a new level by adding the details down to the point of each individual spell has like a rune version of it that can be used in crafting a magical enchanted item. But in general, like this is there, and a lot of this is based on chance. Like this is the type of thing where if players wanted to like create their own rune, they could kind of choose what they wanted and say like, oh, I want to make shoes of spider climb. It's like, okay, but you're going to need to do a lot of research, and you're going to need to find a magician who can create the rune for you or do the enchantment directly if you wanted to do that. If you don't want to go through all that process, you need to just hope that you get lucky and stumble across these runes, because these runes are, I like to do the runes as kind of more so a luck of the draw, you know, make what you want with what you get type of thing. So in that way, I definitely agree that it takes a lot more time, effort, and kind of materials. Materials is just like you have to find if they've got the proper rune to do whatever they're working on doing, then you're good to go, and that's all there is to it. Potions of healing and spell scrolls are exceptions to the following rules. For more information, see Brewing Potions of Healing later in this section, and Scribing a Spell Scroll section below. This part, and this is one of the reasons why I really like the common crafting system. This part is still kind of covered in the crafting system, because the common crafting system, it doesn't really care if it's magic or non-magic. It all follows the same basic rule system. It's just that magic items take more crafting progress, like that you need more points to get to that progress. They just have a higher threshold for completion. In general, potions actually are, I agree, that's different. With a potion, you're brewing plants and herbs and stuff that you find out in the world. You're taking from those items the magical or restorative or whatever. You're taking from those properties and you're mixing them in. So it's like, those aren't really enchanting. That's basically like you're just taking an existing rune and just changing it to be edible, essentially. Spell scrolls are just something that I just generally speaking am not a super big fan of. And it's just because of flavor. I have no reason to dislike it, and in fact, I think that depending on how you run your game, they're a really cool thing. My thing with a spell scroll is it's like when you have a one-use item, you kind of end up like, and this happens to a lot of people when they play video games, where people will save items rather than using them, right? So someone will end up with a big giant hoard of like 800 healing potions or something like that, because they're always afraid to use them. They're like, oh no, I'll just survive and I'll take a long rest. I'll just survive and take a long rest. So when you have a spell scroll that, like, when you use it once and the thing burns up, I notice that happens, that players use it less often. They have less fun with it. So it's like, why go through the time to enchant something that's only going to be used once and you're going to be disappointed in it, right? That, again, kind of turns into the just buy it, right? If it's just going to be a matter of spend the money to get the one-use item, and it's not going to be something special, something personal, something emotional, and just buy it. Don't craft it. Don't waste your time crafting it. And so I find that enchanting things at just like, the cantrip level that gets used once per day is much more encouraging to players than a more powerful spell scroll, because they'll know that like, oh, I can only use it once per day. So if I mess up and use it poorly today, that's okay. I know a better way to use it tomorrow. There we go. So I don't tend to do much with spell scrolls. Now, again, not because I think it's a bad rule, but because the way I run my games and the way I like to encourage players, they just don't have a good place. They just kind of end up feeling a little superfluous and not very helpful. So, but with this paragraph in general, I agree. I agree that kind of brewing potions isn't really the same as creating a magic item. It's more so. I mean, it's like cooking. Right? It just like it also does things beyond just making your belly full, making you happy because you got a full tum tum. I say that to my cat all the time. She'll get really mad at me when I don't feed her as soon as she wants to, and then as soon as I feed her, she comes over and is all sweet rather than ornery, and I'm like, oh, are we a lot happier now that we got a full tum-tum? Yeah. We've all been there. We've all been there. My cat is not the only creature in the world that gets hangry. We've all been there. Okay, so to start with, a character needs a formula for a magic item in order to create it. The formula is like a recipe. It lists the materials needed and the steps required to make the item. I kind of actually use a system kind of like this. That's where the idea of you need the base item and you need the rune, right? You know, I call them enchantment tokens or something like that, but it's like it's a rune system. So it's like you need the item and the rune to be able to do that. And if you don't have the rune and you want to create it, you need to research and figure out how to create a rune of that particular power, right? So there are like recipes to do it. I do really like this kind of concept. I might not use it exactly as there, but I agree that a recipe is a necessary thing. Thinking of making a magic flower crown of druidcraft. Ooh, that would be cool. I like the idea. I like just the imagery of that. I think that's really fitting. Oh man, sorry, my back was stiff. Man, those cracks were loud. You might have even heard those in the mic. Holy crap. I like that idea. Flower crown of druidcraft. That's creative. I like that. I think it's really fun too because you could like personalize it and you could choose like what flowers and everything. So like a person could create exactly what they wanted to do based on the flowers. And it's like you could like have multiple items where it's like they all kind of function the same, but like you can kind of tell where a crown was made based on the flowers that were used, because like different regions of the world would have different flowers available. So it's like if one person has like, you know, roses versus another person having like cactus flowers or something like that. I think that'd be really cool. I really like that idea because you could really flavor. See, and like that's the type of stuff that's where I say where it's like if a player can come up with it, I really want to take the time to you know, properly honor that idea that a player comes up with, because I think just like a player coming up with an idea of I want to create this deserves more than just like, okay, give me, you know, mark off 70 gold and now you've got it. It's like, oh, well, okay. Like, and it just makes the things feel more mundane, but it's like, you know, that idea, a flower crown, right? That's like magically imbued. So it's like the flowers are like almost, you know, like preserved because of that. It just is like, it's a really cool idea, and it has so much potential for a lot of really cool flavor. So it kind of exemplifies where it's exactly what I've been saying this whole time, man. So, and an item invariably requires an exotic material to complete it. This material can range from the skin of a yeti to a vial of water taken from a whirlpool, elemental plane of water. Finding that material should take place as part of an adventure. If players are going to try and create their own runes or something like that, I would absolutely use this type of idea. And you can just kind of wing it for that one. In a lot of ways, I guess actually what I would do is like if you've got a spell, look at the components of the spell and have them find the components and be able to like provide those to whoever is then going to imbue the rune or the item with those items. That's probably what I would do for it. Right, and so like the more intense the spell, the more exotic the item is going to be. Something mundane, right, like a cantrip. It's like, yeah, you need a feather from a bird. It's like, oh yeah, that's easy enough because it's a cantrip, right? People can cast those things at will. You know, a freaking peasant who's read a book about magic can cast, you know, can cast thaumaturgy. Like, jeez. But in general, I actually kind of like this idea that it's like the more complex the magic, stuff like that. And if you're doing the magic from scratch rather than from a rune that you've obtained, absolutely, I think that would be an important component of it. And because this facilitates the whole concept of adding that special personalized touch to it, that special event aspect of it to what the player has already taken the time to come up with. You know, like I say, it honors the thought and the care that the player has already put into it by coming up with the idea. Let's see here. The magic item ingredients table suggests the challenge rating of a creature the creatures need to face to acquire the materials from an item. Note that facing a creature does not necessarily mean that the characters must collect items from its corpse. Rather, the creature might guard a location and resource that the characters need access to. That's kind of beyond. That's not really even a rule of crafting. That's just good. That's just good story writing at that point in time. right? If you want a reward, put a trial in front of it and make the trial appropriate. So I think that's totally fair. As far as like the item rarity and stuff like that goes, like I say, because of the fact that I do like with the runes, and so here's where my system does differ from this. This is all talking about still based on the magical properties of a sword in rules as written, which is essentially that a +1 sword is a magical sword, right? +1 sword, or like a vampiric sword or something like that. Like the more generic approaches to a magic weapon, you kind of have to make that up, because it's like, what's the spell of +1? Like, what would be the components of that? You know, who knows? And so when you're doing this rune system, it kind of takes care of a lot of this for it, right? Because if the rune is going to be for a level 8 spell, then you need a level 8 spell component, which is quite possibly going to just sort of naturally facilitate what challenge rating an animal or a creature that you need that's going to have it, right? Because if you need like a phoenix feather for it, well, clearly you're not going to be able to fight a common creature to get a phoenix feather. Not going to happen. You know, so that's the kind of thing where I think it kind of takes care of itself when you add the detail that I like to add to it. Let's see here. If appropriate, pick a monster or a location that is thematic fit for the item to be crafted. Yeah, for example, creating Mariner's Item. Require the essence of a water weird. Yeah, so that's, again, just like the same stuff, and I think we've kind of already covered that. In addition to facing a specific creature, creating an item comes with a gold piece cost covering other materials, tools, and so on. This harkens back to what we already talked about here, where I think it's just, if you distill it down and just say, like, if you have X number of gold, then you get to craft it. I think that oversimplifies, and I think it does kind of a disservice to the creativity and the effort that goes into these types of things. So I'm not big on that. In general, I've kind of learned that in general as a DM, I am very disinterested in money for players for things. I'm very disinterested in the economy of D&D. Not that it is bad or that it's unnecessary, but it just like, without the process of actually shopping for things, it just kind of feels silly for it to just be like, oh, you want better item? Okay, mark off X gold to get the item. Well, why did we go through that rigmarole other than me just making sure that you don't get it until you go back to the city? It's like, if I'm okay with you having an item at a certain point in time, why do I need you to wait, you know, to go to a city and then mark off the gold? Like, I'd rather just give you the item as something that you could find, right? And if it's the more complicated the item, the more complicated the hiding spot. Like, that's more fun. It's like, buying things is mundane. We all do it every week when we need groceries. Like, that's lame. That's lame. I don't need to play a game to simulate going and buying ingredients, right? So for me, especially when it comes to crafting, distilling it down to, do you have X number of gold, then you can craft it, is like, that's lame. You know, if it's mundane stuff, then it's like, you know, then I guess, then yeah, you would say, yeah, you can go to an alchemist and buy the things, and then you can kind of have an idea for the cost. So it's like, it serves its purpose, but as a general rule, it's like, much more interested in it being more along the lines of like, okay, yeah, you need to adventure to find the rune, and you need to put it on an item that you already have, right, to make a magical item or something like that. So I don't know, and that's just, and again, I cannot say this enough times. This is all my personal taste and my personal take on this. If what I'm saying does not resonate with you, then by all means, do not try to take the system that I use and force it into your game. Do the system that speaks to you. Do the system that works for you in your game. This as it is a very good system. It's cohesive, and it will handle the stuff that you want to do. It's just designed for a game that is played rules as written, with a group that is doing this as an afterthought, not as a key component of who their character is and how their character is developing. Right, this is a side mechanic. This isn't an important one, the way they've got it written. So if that's all your game calls for, then do that. 100%. Don't go through the trouble of adding complexity to it. It's a perfectly serviceable system. It's just a simplified one that I personally don't think is a lot of fun. It's practical. It's not fun. So Magic item crafting, time and cost. Again, the cost, a cost. Everything always is cost. Like, cost to what? Cost to what? To complete a magic item, a character also needs whatever tool proficiency is appropriate. Again, we discussed proficiency. As for crafting non-magical object proficiency, if all the above requirements are met, the result of the process, the magic item is the desired sort. So, like, this is the thing for me, right? Crafting time, and so, okay, the work weeks, again, work weeks are oversimplified. I prefer the crafting points system where it's like, okay, this magical item is worth 500 crafting points. You can earn up to, like, you can make one d20 roll per hour, and you can spend 2 hours of your long rest doing it. So for every long rest, you can get up to maybe 40 points. So it's going to take you at least like 11 days to make this thing, assuming all of the rolls end up perfectly, right? And so it's like, but then it's like, if players are really in the middle of something, then obviously it's not going to get done. Or if players are taking a whole week off, then it's like, don't even roll, right? 2 days in and you got this done, you still got more time to do it. Like, then you can kind of use the how many work weeks concept. But in general, like, this is serviceable if you want a minimal system. If you want something more complex, this just won't really cut it. As for the cost, like, we've already discussed, like, they've already said, oh, you need to have the cost of the supplies to cast the spell or enchant the spell, whatever costs are associated with that, whatever costs are associated with buying the components for the base item itself, right? Half the value of the item. So what are you buying with this gold? Like, do you just put that gold in a bowl and then start, like, close your eyes and enchantment, right? And then suddenly, like, the gold is gone and the thing's there. I mean, I guess if you want to say you're offering the gold as a gift to the gods, then, you know, so that the gods can enchant it. Maybe if that's the way magic works, then in your world, then that can do it. But I don't know. I never really liked that take on gods too. Like, what does a god have to, you know, what is a god doing with, you know, 1,000 mortal gold pieces, other than breaking the economy because that money doesn't return to the economy? Like, what does a god purchase? Like, what's a god? Does a god have like a space yacht, you know, that they're rolling? What are you why are you giving them money? What is a god doing with money, right? Like, gifts for gods are different things. A gift for a god is your devotion, right? Like, you visiting, when people visit a shrine and light incense or something like that, it's not even really the incense that the god appreciates. It's the fact that you have devotedly gone there and given time to them. Like, it's just like, that's what the concept of worshiping is. So, you know, that is a silly reason to do it. So then what's the other reason? That, like, you need to appease like the I don't know, the waves of magic itself. I don't know. Let's see. Gold for the gods goes to, okay, fair enough. It goes to the church. Fair enough. I could see that. But then for the crafting system, then it's like, so then, you know, if we're going to use that idea, then you can only craft in a church, right? Because you have to give it to the church and stuff. So it still ends up being a frustrating concept for me as far as crafting goes. That's a good point. I stand corrected on, you know, why would you give gold to a god? Like, if you're at a church or a place of worship, then that makes sense. It's you know, tithings, I don't know how it's pronounced. That makes sense. Okay. All right. Fair enough. I stand corrected on that one. But for crafting, I still, like, you know, like, I guess if you're only crafting and enchanting in a church, which I suppose actually could make sense depending on how you want to run the game. You know, if you're trying to make a holy sword, then maybe you should be doing that in a church where you can get the blessing of the gods, because that's the house of the gods or something like that. So that's there. So I guess I'll stand corrected and amend my tune. There are situations where this can make sense. But for the way I like to run these things, and especially with using a rune system and stuff like that, this is arbitrary. And this is really just, to me, setting up a barrier to make sure that players that are too early to have legendary items can't make legendary items. That's what this is to me. This is creating a barrier. And to me, it seems kind of flimsy, arbitrary, and artificial. The better thing is using this system, right? having the amount of time it takes, 50 work weeks to do that. In 50 weeks of adventure, like think about how long a player's adventure goes when you think about like the hours passed and stuff like that. Players will level up twice within like a week of in-game time. Like this makes 50 work weeks. That's like an entire year. Players will get up to level 20 in a year. So to me, this is a much more obvious thing. And this is just kind of like, just to make sure that they can't make and buy one. So I still don't really care for this. I still don't really care for the concept of costing gold. I much prefer it to be any gold that comes into it comes from acquiring the components that are needed for it. But even then, I'd prefer the components to just be things that players come across as they're adventuring, whether they're actively looking for it or they find it and are like crafty enough, are clever enough to say like, oh, I can use this to help make this, right? And again, it kind of comes back to that feels to me like it honors the creativity and the effort that the players have already put into thinking and creating this item, than just saying like, oh yeah, you've come up with this really cool thing. Give me some gold and you've got it. It's like, oh, is that easy, huh? Okay, well then I also like a magical motorbike and jetpack. Like, okay, that'll cost a lot more gold, right? Like that's kind of like, So no, I think now that I'm sitting here analyzing it a bit more closely, there are some arguments for this, but I don't care for it. I don't like it. I'm just generally, like I say, I'm just generally unimpressed with worrying about economy in a D&D game in general. I think that's mundane. I don't think crafting is mundane. I don't think role-playing is mundane. I think you found X gold, go to store, get item. Yay. I think that's mundane. Which is why I always make my players role-play their shopping trips, because God damn it, I'm going to make sure that there's some sort of fun in there in some way, shape, or form. We just make crazy shopkeepers and do it that way. Because otherwise it's boring. It's a boring mechanic having, like, you're going from adventures to going grocery shopping. That's boring. So to complete a magic item, characters also need whatever tool proficiency is appropriate, crafting non-magical or proficiency in the Arcana skill. So here's one thing that I do, and this is just for the sake of letting players kind of have more fun. I'm very lenient about this. I actually do, in general, think it makes sense to have someone who is able to cast magic. Like, someone has to at least be able to cast any kind of magic, right? Cast some sort of actual spell in order to enchant an item. Because it does require a certain amount of knowledge of how to manipulate the waves and the flows and, of magic through the world. But I'm very lenient on that. Proficiency in Arcana. And, someone who's not, just because you're not a scholar of magic doesn't mean you don't have an understanding of how it works, right? That's kind of what my take is. And again, it's like proficiency with the tools and stuff. It's like, if you have I'm trying to think about people who have like certain innate spells that they can cast, right? It's like if you have a barbarian that can cast a buff on himself or something like that because it's just like a racial trait or a character trait or whatever, then it's like they clearly have at least a basic understanding, even though they're not actually like a sorcerer or whatever. So I'm pretty lenient on this, although I will say this is one of the easiest ones for me to understand an argument for requiring it. I'm just lenient with it because I like seeing my players have fun, and it's easier when they don't have to sit there thinking about their proficiencies and stuff. It's just like, yeah, if you want to make an item, then get the tools, get the stuff, and go for it. Just have fun with it. Complications. Most of the complications involved in creating something, especially a magic item, are linked to the difficulty in finding rare ingredients or components needed to complete the work. Complications a character might face as byproducts of the creation process are most interesting when the characters are working on a magic item. There's a 10% chance for every 5 work weeks spent on crafting an item that a complication occurs. The crafting complications table provides examples of what might happen. The general idea of a complication table and complications in general, now that is a rule as written that I will absolutely follow as written. Well, not as written, but I will absolutely follow. I love complications. That's why I create contingencies for cursed or sentient versions of any item that's being enchanted. I love that stuff. I love complications. I love when things aren't just, and it's like, it's why I don't like buying things. There's no chance of complication, right? It's just like, yeah, you give money, you get item. Boring. Snooze fest. But now you're telling me, okay, I'm going to make something. There's a chance that this explodes in my face. There's a chance that I accidentally cursed my knife that I'm making. There's a chance of this, that, or the other thing. Now we're talking. Now we're talking mixed successes and stuff like that. That's what I'm talking about. So I actually love this idea. And this is very much the idea, like where my idea and determination to have prepared curses and sentience contingencies for magical items comes from. But I do kind of like some of these that are very different, and these are very much based around the idea of downtime only referring to like 2 or 3 weeks in between an adventure as far as players time or character time goes. But like rumors swirl that you're working on an unstable, what you're working on is unstable and a threat to the community. I love that idea. That's the type of thing though that for me, I don't know if I would necessarily even like rely on a rolling table. I would just be like, hey, this sounds kind of fun. They're working on this item. This can be just kind of a fun, goofy thing to do. So I just do it just because I feel like it. If tools are stolen, forcing you to buy new ones. So fair enough, fair cop. Again, that's one that I think just kind of comes by in role playing, right? If you want to do something, if players have really bad investigation checks or perception checks while guarding the place at night, then it's like, yeah, you can just say like, yeah, you thought you heard some footsteps, you went over and checked, didn't notice anything, and in the morning a bunch of their stuff is gone. That's kind of gets possibly taken care of in role play. And I think what's funny about this is I think these are complications for more than just crafting, and that's why I think that some of them are pretty intuitive and you don't really need a D1 table, because if you're just creating a game that is focused around the basic tenet of players presented with problem, players must find solution, a lot of these things will just inherently happen throughout the rest of the game because these are complications for everything you do, not just crafting. A local wizard shows keen interest in your work and insists on observing you. Fun, yeah. Powerful noble offers a hefty price for your work, is not interested in hearing no for an answer. And that price better be willing to be twice as hefty then. Dwarf clan accuses you of stealing its secret lore to fuel your work. That one can definitely come up a lot in my game. Because if players are going through an abandoned place, find secrets that are like handed down from family to family, but they find a journal that has it in there, some people might get kind of snippy about that. You never know. Someone all of a sudden goes to the bakery owned by the players and like, wait, these are Grandma's brownies. You made them exactly like Grandma's brownies. How'd you do that? And it's like, oh, I found your great-grandma's recipe book while I was exploring that dead town all the way over there. Pretty sure her skull is still on the floor. Awkward. Right? It's like, I don't know, that's a fun one. Competitor spreads rumors that your work is shoddy and prone to failure. Oh yeah, 100%. That one really only matters if your players are making things to sell. And again, that kind of feeds into this really being focused on like downtime as in time between adventures as opposed to what you're doing during a long rest. But I think it's important. Excuse me. I think it's important to let players do stuff during long rests. Give them like, yeah, you can have up to 2 hours of your long rest to do stuff, because like in the first place, no one likes it, but you can survive off of 6 hours of sleep for a day, no problem, right? You can do that. Like I've done 6 or fewer. No, I guess 6 or less, because an hour can be subdivided. 6. I've done a maximum of 6 hours of sleep every night, other than just like when I'm on vacation and being lazy. In general, I get 6 hours or less of sleep every night. Like that's just how I live my life, right? So you can definitely get rested. Yeah, it's nice, and you're extra rested if you get more, but so I guess what I'm saying is, it makes sense for them to be able to have, oh my gosh, I'm saying I'm well rested as I'm sitting here yawning. Just getting the afternoon sleepies. I get those a lot. Maybe it's because I don't get enough sleep every single night. No, gosh, I'm distracting myself. No. So the idea is like, I think it's totally fair game for players to use long rests to work on crafting items. Like, I don't see any reason to require that they spend at least a whole week in town just to craft an item. I think that's completely unnecessary. I think that's an unnecessary complication to give to your players. So, okay, brewing potions and healing, potions of healing. This is very much a like this kind of falls under brewing a potion type of thing, which like you need to have enough time to like actually boil the pot as needed and stuff like that. I don't under a special category for item crafting, except from other magic items. Character who has proficiency with an herbalism kit can create these potions. Times and costs for doing so. Summarizing the potion of healing creation table. Yeah, that just kind of all of the rules we've already discussed will cover these types of things. So that's the system as it is. And again, I want to make it perfectly clear. I don't think this is a bad system. I just think it's a very simplified system designed for a very specific situation, right? Or a very specific style of gameplay. I think it's a system that's 100% geared towards a game that only allows crafting when players are taking extended stays in cities between adventures, right? I think that's just what this system is made for. The system doesn't consider a player wanting to create a customized item for themselves, right? So it's like, it's a good start, but clearly we need something more. Clearly we need something a little more. I'm gonna just take like 30 seconds. I'm gonna go refill my beverage. I think that'll help me. I think I'm a little dehydrated, and that's part of what's making me sleepy. So I'll be right back. I'm just gonna refill my beverage. 1 second. Okay. Appreciate your patience. Yeah, another indication that I think I'm a little dehydrated is been sitting here for almost an hour and a half, and I have not had to go to the bathroom like I usually have to do every single hour. So all those meetings, the meetings that I've been going through, and the meeting that I had this morning kind of threw off my usual. Like, it's not that I intentionally regiment my fluid intake system, but like when I can operate my days on my preferred schedule, it just sort of happens naturally because I've kind of gotten to a point where it's like I know, oh, when I'm doing this, I've got this much, to drink and do this. Like, so when I'm streaming, usually when I've got my 2 hours, it's like, okay, yeah, 1 glass, per hour. I try to get through that, and it's like really easy. You get those checkpoints. It's like keeps me hydrated. But because the meetings have been getting in the way and changing things, I just haven't kept up with that. So it's a weird day. A weird day, and it's going to keep being one because I've got that other meeting that's happening later this afternoon. So, oh, boy. Boy, some weeks are just like that. Some weeks are just like that. Fluids. That was weird. I shouldn't have said that. I apologize. That just came out weird. I sounded like a real weirdo saying that one. All right, so let's take a look at our common crafting system. So we've kind of talked about the basic rules here, right? Where it's like you can do it during long rest. You can spend up to 2 hours, and so it's like per each hour you roll a d20. If you have the right tools, add proficiency, and that goes towards crafting your stuff. So foraging materials. I don't know that I use this exactly as it is here. Once a day, 24 hours. A player can choose to search their current area for materials. To do so, the player states the exact material they are searching for, as well as which crafting tools they are using to search. And the DM decides if the search is fruitful. A player can only search for materials that are used by the crafting tools they are using. For instance, a player searching for glassblower's tools, searching with glassblower's tools, can only search for glass. Depending on the area, so, like I don't really care for that. Area for certain materials might not be available. Optionally, a DM might enforce an intelligence survival check to see if the search is successful. If materials are available, the player rolls 1d4 to determine how many materials were found, and that's based off of using these materials that are in there. This is the common crafting system as it's written. right? Is what these things are talking about, doing these types of things. I let it get even more detailed, and I don't have a written set of rules for this because I very much yes and the process of players getting the materials. Player tells me, I really want to make a sword. Great, let's make a sword. You're going to need some kind of metal, probably some steel, and whatever inlays and jewels and stuff you want to put into it. You're going to need to do, you're going to need this, that, and the other thing. How many ingots are you going to need for like, I don't know. I might do a quick Google search based on the type of sword and be like, how much metal do you need? And it's like, okay, yeah, we'll say you need this many ingots, right? And so now I'll know, for me, that's kind of like the trigger as a DM, like, oh, okay, my player wants to do this thing. Let's hide some of, let's hide some of these items in and around the places they're exploring in ways that make sense, right? So that they can think to look for those things. So it's like, suddenly it'll be like, oh, okay, he wants to do this. Well, the next dungeon they're going to, in this floor, there was a kitchen there, but maybe I'll change that to being like a bit of a, a smithing area. Or it's like, there were stables, but maybe it's a smithing area because they had a hobby. And you do stuff like that, and then you just hide some items in there, and you say like, yeah, you find what appears to be a small little smith shop. Like perhaps they had metalworking as a hobby. And you give that, and like the player will hopefully be like, oh, metalworking. Oh, well, when you put it that way. And then they'll go ahead and do their search. And like you have like however you've designed it for them to find the items, and you just kind of go through that. So I'll do it like that. And so that way we can make it much more specific, because this system is very much like, it talks about like how, oh yeah, they search the area for these specific things, but it's like metal times 3. Does that mean like any scrap metal that they find? Because I don't know that you're going to make a particularly great sword out of like a bunch of rusty farm implements or something, right? Like that's going to be tough. So I kind of do it more like players tell me what they want to find, and then I will hide opportunities for them to find those things that they need. If it's something that's a bit more common, right, you can just yes and it, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I want to brew some potions, but I need some flowers with healing processes. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'll think about the region, and maybe there's like this cactus flower that does this type of thing. And so you have them search around, and then it's like, okay, yeah, no, you find cactus flowers, and then you have them do like a survival check. It's like, yeah, and you know that they have some healing properties, and then they've got the item. So it's like, I'm really fluid with it based on what they want to make. But that's because, like, I think this system is almost also kind of made to be a system where you can, as like on top of like whatever gold you put into treasure chests and stuff like that, you also just put like a random collection of things, right? Like poison. Like, oh yeah, there's 5 vials of poison in there. Oh yeah, you find, a couple really nice stones. Like, oh yeah, you open this thing and you find like 4 craftings worth of metal. And it's like you're giving them components that they can then like, it's almost like playing Settlers of Catan, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you've got your resources, and once you get up enough of certain kinds, then you can use those to like buy this item. It's like you can use these to make this item. And so this is really good if your players want to do kind of more of a, oh, crafting is an option. Let's like save up and try and get lucky, and maybe we can end up crafting something really cool, right? So this is better. But the way I like to do it is players come up with the idea for a very personalized item that they want to make. So for me, I kind of approach it from the other angle. Rather than what you find begets what you make, it's more so what you make begets what I will put in there for you to find. So just like with the other thing, I think this is really good. I think the way that they have that here is excellent. I think this is a really excellent system. It's just, I like to go even a step further because I'm a goofball who just likes to make more work for himself. But that's the basic idea that they're going with there, and I think it's a good system. Making artwork. When crafting artwork, upon completion, the player rolls 1d20 to determine quality of the artwork. I do like this. I have never had players want to make artwork, so I've never been able to try this. But I do actually like this system, and I think it would be really fun to see if they like can make good stuff. Because I would love to see someone, make like roll a 1, and it's just like they're so proud of themselves because they did like a first grade level like finger painting of their mom smiling and a big giant sun in the background, right? Like I would love that. I think that would be hilarious. I think that absolutely would be hilarious, because then I would also love for a player, if they're doing that for something to sell, I would love for a player to try and sell it and be like, oh, this was actually made by such and such creature. It was remarkably intelligent. This was made by a giant spider, remarkably intelligent, right? It's very rare because of that. And you just like do something like that. I think it'd be funny. Deconstructing items. I think this is a really fun system for if players want to like go a step further, and if you give them a cool item, if they want to take parts of that item. So I always have this idea in the back of my mind, and I actually like this idea a lot when it comes to the concept of enchanting items and using runes, because I think you could really use this system very effectively, this basic deconstruction system, where it's basically it's the same thing, it's just for taking things apart rather than putting them together. But I really like the idea of a player being able to reverse the process. Essentially, you're enchanting a stone to make a rune, as opposed to enchanting using a rune to make an item. It's like the roles are reversed, right? Normally you have spell embedded in rune, and then you transfer magic from rune to item. You guys can't see my hands, I'm doing this. Yeah, you have rune, you take magic from rune and pour it into the item, right? That's the idea. And I like the idea of deconstructing to be like, you have item that has a trait, like you found a hammer, a +2 hammer, and you really want to add that +2 to your scimitar. All right, well, we'll take that off. But I like the idea of not being able to use that item as a rune, but rather you have to use a rune to transport it, right? So it's like you have to carefully deconstruct that item to then, pour that magic in the rune, and then you can take that rune and move it over. So it would take a lot of extra work, but if you wanted to do that, great, yeah, go for it. Which I think is really fun, and why I've started thinking about giving my players actual items from like my enchanting system, as opposed to just only giving them the runes. Because then if they really wanted to do that, right? And it's like, you have to think about this. Is it worth it to do it for a level 9 spell? If you want that level 9 spell, maybe just use the original item that you had. If it's a cantrip, on a hammer, and you want to have that on your sword, then it's a cantrip. That might be worth it. That might only take you a couple weeks. Like, that's fine. So I like that idea. I really like that idea. I don't use it a whole lot, but it's always in the back of my mind. And it's really just this same system, just a different source and target. So all of these things, other notes, these types of things, I don't really worry about these things. Lockpicks are used to unlock doors rather than using the thieves' tools itself. These are just like small little notes I don't really care about. So now the one that I also want to really look at is my enchanting system. So this is something that I've added. So to enchant, you must also have all the components required to cast the spell. For ease, use on first instance of beginning enchantment. So for me, I feel like, to understand the way I approach enchanting things in my games, one thing that can be really helpful, let me zoom in on this here. This is really tiny. One thing that can be really helpful is to think about how I view magic in my world. I don't see magic as being... How do I explain this? A lot of times the way magic is presented in works of fantasy and works of fiction is it's like... a spell is a discrete thing, and the magic is something that is part of the spellcaster, right? So the spellcaster has within them the specific skill and the magical energy to cast a fireball or something, right? It's kind of like a magic version of a person who wants to succeed at trivia. They have their own pool of knowledge, and they use that to pull the discrete fact to answer what was the capital of, such and such state, right? Like that's how most magic is presented, where it's like a person is born, they have the ability of magic, and they can pull specific magic cards out of their being to cast into the world, right? That's how magic is. In my world, and how I like to think about magic, what I think is more interesting and more fun is magic doesn't belong to the magic user. They don't have an internal pool of magic, nor do they have like to them, like their magic isn't like their soul where they possess it. It's very much them. It's very much their identity. Magic, the way I see it, is it's something that is a living concept. Like, it's almost sentient in its own way. The magic flows through the world, right? Magic is going through the world. And a magic user is someone who has taken the time to learn or has the innate ability to call upon that magic and like almost like speak the language of the magic and convince the magic to do something. And while there are specific spells, that's because it's not because the magic is only capable of doing that. Like, it's like, take the example of like Fireball, right? Fireball is a very like defined spell that has a defined result. That's not to say that that's the only permutation of Fireball that can exist within the magic. It's just that through study, people have learned that that is the sentence that gets spoken, so to speak, right, to use the metaphor. That's the sentence that gets spoken to get this specific result. Just like how if I were, like, just like how me saying, I am hungry, right, that's a very specific sentence that gets a very specific meaning. That doesn't mean that that's the only way for me to convey that I am hungry. I could also say, I have great hunger inside of me. And that changes the feel of what I'm saying, but it still says kind of the same thing. So in that way, magic, in theory, could be more than just saying the incantation and using the specific components to cast Fireball, right? Someone who wanted to experiment with it could create other things, and that's why there are different spells that invoke fire and energy and healing and all that kind of stuff. But to me, that's what magic is, and that's what makes it more interesting. And some creatures are born with an innate ability to speak that language, while others have to learn it. And I think that's why I don't like having enchantment be limited to only sorcerers and warlocks, and wizards, people that are innate magic users. Like, I don't like limiting that, because I think that it's more interesting if magic is a living thing that someone can learn to speak to, right? And so someone, through enough study, even if they're just a barbarian who punches everything, they can still, if they're focused enough, learn to listen to the magic and speak back to it. And so that's just how I approach magic, and that's where a lot of my ideas of this enchantment, I'm painstakingly going through and finding enchantment versions of the spells that are cast, because it's not that the spell is a discrete, measurable thing. It's not a card that someone casts. It's not a spell scroll that someone burns. It is the magic flowing, being spoken to, and formed into, like, convinced to do this one thing. And so through experimentation, there's no reason to think that we can't modify that sentence a bit to invoke, the same spell results, but speak it in a way that works that magic then into an item that the item then is like programmed to speak that sentence, right? So that's a lot of where my concepts of magic in my world come from, and I don't know if that makes sense to people. It's a very clear as day concept in my mind, but it's also a concept that I have massaged over, at least a decade as I have built my homebrew world. Because that's like, the magic is a really strong example of why I say I am a world builder before I'm a DM. I have made this world, and to me, that's what would make sense. That's what would hold logical consistency in a world of magic. And so I now use the rules, like I massage and flex and, modify the rules of D&D so that way they can be used to share my world with players, right? That's kind of my approach to things, and that's why I'm fast and loose with it, because I have a world that I've created, and I like to present that, and this world is very much conducive with D&D 5e, much like it would be very conducive with any other fantasy. Like, I could use Pathfinder just as easily. I use 5e because that one's more broadly known, especially to newer players, so it's a much easier way to reach a larger audience to use 5e, right? Like, Pathfinder is really good for reaching the hardcore audience, D&D is very good for reaching the general audience, right? Because you say Pathfinder, the average person is going to be like, I don't know what that is. You say Dungeons and Dragons, everyone's like, oh, I know what that is, right? So that's why I use it. But yeah, so it's like, I hope that's clear. I hope that's clear. It's like another analogy I use a lot is like magic exists. And like and the way I think about magic too is it's almost like a form of physics. It's something that like technology or enchanted items could manipulate too. It's almost like the concept of like flying. There are multiple ways to fly, right? There are a lot of different ways that people and creatures fly. And like flying is like a concept, an energy. There's not a discrete one correct way to fly. You can glide, and that's almost like a form of flying. And some creatures use technology to fly, right? Humans, we use planes to fly. Whereas some creatures, like birds, have the innate ability to fly. And the way a bird flies is very different than the way a bug flies, right? And so there's like all these different things. And so that's why within my world and my universe, the concept of magic can exist on some planets in conjunction with other planets that maybe don't have magic at all, because no creatures born on that planet were born with an innate ability to speak the language of magic, right? Like no one were born that way, and because of that, none have figured out a way to, like, none have even known that there was a reason to create technology that could speak to magic, right? So it's like in my mind, my D&D world is part of my larger like fantasy universe that I create when I'm in a more sci-fi version. But it's why you can have things like in Starfinder, why there's like techno magic and stuff like that, because there's people who have figured out that there is a language of magic, and they found ways to use technology to compensate for the fact that they don't have innate abilities to speak the magic. So that's just kind of how I view magic, and I think that like once it's clear that that's how I view magic in my world, that's how I approach enchantment, and that's why I am very comfortable playing very fast and loose with magic in my world, because to me magic isn't a deck of cards. Magic is just part of the world. It's like a sentient existing part of the world. It is no more or less integral than the sun that shines, the stars that shine, the wind that blows. It is part of this world. It is always there, and it can be just like any other part of the world. We can change the earth to grow plants. We can modify, and there are an infinite number of ways to do it, some that work better and some that work worse, right? We can manipulate the air so that we can fly in different ways, right? We can manipulate the sun to produce energy that can, like the sun can be used to just warm us on a sunny day, all the way to it can be used to power a blender if you have solar panels. I view magic as part of that. And so the concept of being able to play with magic, to modify and change it and use it in enchantments and do stuff like that, to me just feels like such a natural, obvious concept. And that's why I kind of insist on doing this. Mechanically speaking, right? So there's study. I have it broken into two things. There's studying, learning to speak the language of that spell, right? Or that type of magic. And then there's enchanting, then using that and manipulating what you've learned in terms of how to speak it to then basically teach an object how to then speak that spell, right? And so if you're a magic user, you might be able to just like straight up enchant something without a rune. But if you're not a magic user, you can use the rune, you can use technology to help you and do that enchantment, help you learn how to speak the language of magic, right? So it's like, studying a spell requires obtaining a book that describes the spell, and the art of using it for an enchantment. Once a spell has been studied, it can be used indefinitely. So that's like that's very much the sorcerer concept of it. And like the idea for me is I always kind of figure someone who's using a rune but doesn't know how to use that spell, they go and study that spell, then they can use that rune and use that rune for enchanting items or deconstructing that item for like the rest of forever. They've studied it, they understand that language, they understand that spell's sentence, or paragraph, or however you want to do it. I'm kind of latching onto the language of magic analogy, but I think that's probably one of the simplest ones that still gets the idea across, right? So they can do that. Now, studying takes a lot of time, and I kind of have done like Like it's starting off at, it takes 20, so it would take at least a day to study and understand a cantrip. Or in this, for the enchanting, it would take at least a day. You would have to at least spend one evening working to transfer an enchantment from a rune to an item, or so on and so forth, right? Then the additions here are adding roughly 50% more. So it's like times 1.5 to get these, right? So to a level 1 would take 30, because that's 20 plus 10, right? And so that's just kind of the increment that I found for that. And that gets pretty intense. I mean, let's just really quickly divide 765 by 20 here. So 765 divided by 20. It will functionally take at least 38 days, to do that. That's assuming you get a natural 20 every time. And in theory, it could even be less if you have the proper proficiencies and all that kind of stuff. So it could take, it'll take at least a month to do that. Realistically, if we're talking about laws of average, like the average roll for a D20 will probably be somewhere, it'll be probably somewhere around a 10, because sometimes you'll get a 20, sometimes you'll get a 1. So instead, it's probably going to take more like 70 days. So that's going to take like a month and a half or so. And that seems like a significant amount of time, especially when you consider the fact that players might not work on that stuff every single night. They might not have the opportunity to. Players might have different things that they're spending their time on. So to me, I think that is a perfectly reasonable amount of time, because the other thing to think about it is it might go 3 or 4 sessions in between long rests that players take, right? And the long rest is their opportunity to work on these things. So it's like, yeah, no, that seems like a good amount of time. It's where the cantrip, it could get done in a day if you get some good rolls. If you're really focused and you get working and you're lucky on it, then that might be all it takes. Or it might take a whole lot longer, if you just keep rolling ones because you're just a goofball who's got some bad luck going. Right, but that's the idea, and it's all based on the spell level. Right? Because that just is like the obvious. I mean, that's obvious, I think. I think it's obvious. I think most people would agree that's pretty obvious. But that's how enchantment comes about. And when I'm talking about my enchantment system that I use, this is where it's all born from. It's all born from this common crafting system. And again, I can't recommend this enough. The baseline common crafting system is not mine. A lot of people who are much more clever than me came up with this far before I had even thought about it. So when I started wanting to do crafting for my players, I started doing some research and I came upon this. Highly recommend looking it up. I couldn't tell you where I originally found it. I couldn't tell you where I found this Excel sheet that is so helpful. But if you Google it, it'll come up, because I see references to the common crafting system come up. It's a fairly well-known homebrew system that a lot of DMs look to as a baseline or as like their entire crafting system. So I highly recommend it. And as I'm looking at this, and as I'm looking at the rules of how this is, I am still very content with how this is. I think it's really good, especially when we're talking homebrew rules. I think it's really good to periodically revisit them and make sure they still serve the purpose appropriately and aren't over or underpowered based on how you as a DM are running your games. So I think doing this today, even though I've done like 0 writing, I think this was really helpful, because the other thing about it too is, even though I haven't made any changes, I've kind of refreshed and reviewed and now have a much stronger, clearer picture in my mind of how the crafting system that my players have been using, they just used it earlier this week, is functioning. And so it makes it a lot easier for me to think about like, okay, yes, I do have in mind how to run this for them. It's very clear in my mind. It's the teaching effect. I get this all the time when I'm teaching kickboxing classes. Just teaching, even though I'm not actively practicing, when I'm teaching things to students, I'm still getting better, because it requires me to think about how we do things, why we do things that way, what the reasons are, and it helps you fine-tune things. So even though I haven't changed anything, I haven't created anything, this right here, this exercise of spending an hour and a half, actually at this point, closer to 2 hours, just studying this and going over these rules and everything, I have a very clear sense in mind of how this homebrew system works, why I'm using it, and I have a very strong a very strong resolution in me that, like, yes, I really like this system. I want to keep using this system. So I think today was actually extremely productive, and I'm really happy that we took the time to do this. But now I'm looking at the time, and we're about at the end of time, and unfortunately, I cannot stick around much later, so I gotta get going on my sign off. I have more work meetings this afternoon. There's just been a lot of meetings this week, and I'm so ready for this week to be done. I have tomorrow off from work, so I will definitely be back. For those of you that don't want to stick around for my usual announcements that I do, I will be back tomorrow 100%. Depending on how the schedule works out, I may even do a little extra to make up for the fact that I can't stream today. No promise, or can't stream video gaming today. No promises on that. I have a lot of other responsibilities always, and I may not be able to bump any of those. But if I can, I would very much like to. Yeah, I'm gonna switch this over to just chatting. Yeah. Thank you so much to everyone who stopped by. I really had a good time actually with just kind of going over this today. I really hope this was helpful. I may even highlight this one on my YouTube page. I think this is a really helpful one, and I think this one goes over a lot of like why I'm doing my spells and enchantment projects that I do most Thursdays. And I think this is just the concepts of crafting. I think crafting is one of the best homebrew or really just like bonus rule systems that you can use in D&D, because I think crafting really opens up the door for so much customization and personalization of your games, and it can really be such a good way to really suck in your players and really get them engaged in their character and what their character uses and how their character works. I just think crafting is such an awesome thing. So I really hope that this was helpful for people. It was definitely helpful for me, even though I just reaffirmed that I'm going to keep doing what I'm already doing. It was really helpful for me to review this stuff. I'm really pleased with today's stream. I don't know. I really liked it. And in general, I mean, I'm always pleased with my streams. I love streaming. I have such a good time doing this. Like, this is so much fun. There's a reason I keep doing this, even though I'm just doing it voluntarily of my own time. There's a reason I keep doing it, and it's because I love doing it. And I think one of the reasons I love doing it is because I genuinely am so flattered and so thankful for the audience that I have. Everyone is like super kind. Everyone is super like engaged. Even when chat's like quiet, people are engaged on Discord. People stop in and see what I'm doing. People come back for more. It's just it's such a good feeling, and I'm so glad that other people are enjoying it. So thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Just to go through my usual plugs and announcements. Like I just mentioned, I've got a Discord server. If you want to talk more about D&D, if you want to discuss different nuances of homebrew stuff, of homebrew rules and crafting and all that stuff, like, by all means, get involved in that, and just like random thoughts, like no wrong answers. Go onto the Discord server and share ideas. I love these discussions. I love being engaged with you guys. So get yourself involved in that. I also put up a lot of announcements about when I'm going live and changes to my schedule on Discord. So the Discord server is a really good way to just sort of like, one place for all of it. Like, it's a good catch-all system if you want to just stay connected and stay involved with my streams. So that's like one of the best resources there. If Discord ain't your thing, I do have a Twitter and Virus Streams. You can find me there on Twitter. I do a lot of announcements, and I just kind of share random stupid thoughts that I have. So, go check that out if that amuses you, if you think that'll be fun. You can follow me there. I have an Instagram, EnviroBoy Streams. That one's been really fun for me. I've been having a lot of fun sort of sharing and showing some of the other stuff that I do with my life. The kickboxing, it's such an important part of my life, kickboxing is. So I love that I have a way to share some videos of me doing that kind of stuff. Rock climbing is a pretty important part of my life. I share videos of me rock climbing. And my cat is a pretty important part of my life. And so I share cat photos. And who doesn't love cat photos? I mean, come on. So follow me on EnviroBoy Streams on Instagram. That can be a fun one. And then, like I mentioned, also, I do have my YouTube channel. If you really like the stuff that I do, but it's hard to watch live, I put all of my VODs on my YouTube channel. It's got hundreds of hours of D&D stuff alone, as well as hundreds of hours of me playing video games. It's awesome. I love it. It's like, I love that I can just put my stuff up there. I hate the concept of any of my streams being exclusive to only the people that can be right there right now. Like, I know that's supposed to drive up demand or something like that, but I ain't about that. Like, especially with my stuff, like, the reason I stream my writing is because I want to help other people get more involved in world building and be more passionate about DMing and stuff like that. So all of my VODs are there. Check those out. I have been teaching myself how to do video editing, so I'm hoping that I can like maybe one of these days feel confident enough to actually do like dedicated specific YouTube videos that are maybe more distilled versions of everything that I explained today, right? Where I just really talk about the mechanics and do like a more instructional thing of my way of doing it. There's a million other resources that are just as good as anything I could make, but you know, maybe the way I did it spoke to you, and so if I make a video, you'll love it. I don't know. But at any rate, the YouTube channel is there. You can check me out there, EnviroBoy on YouTube. And then the last link you'll find if you're checking my about page, or if you're checking my the video description below on YouTube. The other link there is a donation link. It is always very flattering, and I'm always very grateful if anyone does donate. And I have had people donate, and I find that incredibly flattering and surprising. I never would have thought people would like my stuff enough to do that. So that's there. If you want, if that's how you want to support, then I will always be eternally grateful for that. That's, you know, the donations help me get an actual mic here, and it's like I love that, you know, I can take that and keep making my streams better for people that like them. You know, that's what I love about it. But that said, if donating is hard, or it's just not something that you like to do, then you certainly don't need to, because the thing that's probably the most helpful and the most meaningful to me is just when you stop by and hang out and watch. You know, that's like, knowing that people actually like what I'm doing, seeing my view counts go up, like that's the most exciting thing for me. I'm so flattered by that, so humbled by it. So if you really want to support, just keep coming by and watching, you know, like, subscribe, tell a friend about the streams, just, you know, help the channel grow, help more people come in for the discussions about D&D stuff, help more people get passionate about D&D. Like that's the most helpful thing you can do for me, because that's the stuff that means something to me. So, but yeah, so those are all my links. Like I say, there's tragically no video game streaming today. I gotta go be a responsible adult and sit through a big long meeting on, you know, a video meeting. It's gonna be boring. I'll probably take my crochet project that I'm working on and just work on that discreetly. So no video game streaming today. However, tomorrow, Friday, I will be back. We will be doing some writing. We will be doing some gaming. We will be having a good time. I promise you that. So come check it out tomorrow. If you can't tomorrow, next week, I was looking at it. I should have a pretty normal week next week for streaming. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time is when I start my writing, and then 1:30 p.m. Eastern time again is when I switch over to some sort of gaming. Do a variety of writing projects, a variety of gaming throughout the week. So check out any of those times, and you'll hopefully find something that's fun and interesting. And if you check out a time and the game I'm playing isn't interesting, then come back the next day, because I'm playing a different game. You know, just come hang out with me, whatever it is. Even if you don't like the game, come hang out with me and we can make fun of the game together. Even my favorite games, there's stuff to make fun of in a game. That's really fun. So I don't know. That's all my sales. Those are all my sales pitches. All my plugs. That's all my information, all my announcements, all that kind of stuff. The only other thing to say is, again, just thank you so much to everyone who stopped by. Really good stream today. Really good stream every day. I just like streaming is always the best part of my day. Second best if it's a kickboxing day. I'll be honest, I really like kickboxing. Tied for first if it's a kickboxing day. But it's one of the favorite things that I do with my days ever. I always look forward to it. I'm never tired of doing it. It's just so fun. So, and I just really appreciate that people are here to encourage and hang out with me while I do it. So thank you so much. I appreciate you. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you tomorrow. And yeah, that's all I got. I'll catch you cats on the flip side. Yeah, I don't know. That was maybe more awkward, but maybe it's my thing. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, no, you know what? I'm making it my thing. Yeah, I'll catch you cats on the flip side.